Please, Ashton, don't leave me like this. I beg you, look at me. Why are you so cold?
She walked through those iron gates like she owned every stone of Witmore Hall. And perhaps she always had. 4 carriages rolled in behind her, each one bearing a crest that made the footman step back and the butler forget how to breathe. The children inside were not small or quiet or easily ignored. They were tall for their ages, sharp-eyed, and dressed in the finest wool that Whitmore had ever seen pass through its gates. 4 of them. 4 boys, each one carrying a name that half of London's nobility would have traded their estates to carry. The Duchess, or rather the woman this house had once thrown out like a crumpled letter, stood at the entrance with her chin lifted and her hands perfectly still. She had not always stood like that. 7 years ago, she stood in this very courtyard and wept. She had begged. Then she had held out her hands to a man who looked at her the way one looks at a broken vase. Useful once. Useless now. The Duke of Whitmore had signed the annulment papers before the ink on their 3rd wedding anniversary letter had even dried. His mother had called her hollow. His solicitor had called her fortunate to leave with her name halfway intact, and the Duke himself had said nothing. That silence had been the cruelest thing of all. But silence, as it turns out, has a way of filling up over time. The woman who returned to Witmore Hall that grey Tuesday morning was not the girl who had left it. Her name was Lady Corette Dunmore, and she had not come back to forgive anyone. She had not come back to plead or to weep, or to remind the Duke of what he had thrown away. She had come back because the estate, as by blood right and legal inheritance, belonged to her sons. All 4 of them, and not a single judge in England could say otherwise. The Duke appeared at the top of the stone steps. His jaw was tight. His eyes, still that unbearable shade of dark grey, landed on her face first, then dropped to the 4 boys standing like quiet soldiers at her back. He went very still. She gave him the smallest smile. Not warm. Not cruel. Simply certain. Now, here is the question burning in every room of Witmore Hall. If a man throws away what he never deserved, does he get to mourn it when it comes back wearing a crown? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? And if this story already has your heart in its grip, please hit that subscribe button, because what happens next inside those walls will change everything. The morning Corette Dunmore returned to Witmore Hall, the roses along the eastern wall were in full bloom. Nobody had planted them for her. And yet there they were, red and relentless, climbing the old stone like they had been waiting 7 years for something worth celebrating. She didn't look at them. She had trained herself not to look at beautiful things that belonged to Whitmore. It made the breathing easier, and breathing, for a long time, had been the hardest thing she did each day. Her lady's maid, Tessa, sat across from her in the lead carriage and said nothing. Tessa had been with her since before the marriage, before the annulment, before the 4 small faces that had changed everything. She knew when words helped and when they only got in the way. The 4 boys rode in the second carriage, watched over by their tutor, Mr. or Aldwyn Price, a serious man from Edinburgh whose spectacles never sat quite straight. He had taught them history, languages, mathematics, and the particular art of entering a room without looking surprised by anything in it. The oldest was Rowan, 7 years old, steady-eyed and quietly measuring. The second was Fletcher, 6, restless and bright, the kind of child who made friends with strangers in 10 minutes. The twins came last. Jasper and Colt, 5 years old, identical in face and opposite in everything else. Jasper was gentle and fond of animals. Colt was fearless and had once walked up to a mounted soldier in a market square and asked to hold his sword. 4 boys. 4 futures the Duke of Whitmore had signed away without knowing they existed. That was the part Corette had lived with longest, not the humiliation of the annulment, or not the whispers in drawing rooms across London. Those things had hurt, but they had also hardened into something useful, something she had carried like a lantern through the darkest stretch of her life. What she truly lived with was the knowledge that he had never asked. When Lord Ashton Beaumont had placed the annulment papers on the desk between them, he had not asked whether she was well, where she would go, or whether she had anything left to say. He had told her, in a voice she still heard in the thin hours before dawn, that the marriage had been a mistake from the beginning, and that it was better for them both to be free of it. She had been 3 weeks along when he said it. She had not known yet. By the time she did, she was already at her aunt's cottage in the Derbyshire hills, wrapped in borrowed blankets, or eating soup that tasted like salt and kindness. The physicians in London had told her, in the careful language doctors use when they want to avoid causing pain but cause it anyway, that children would be very difficult for her. Perhaps impossible. She had believed them so completely that when Ashton's mother had stood in her sitting room and called her barren and unfit for the Whitmore line, she had not fought back. And then Rowan had arrived, then Fletcher. Then, on a winter night, so cold the windows frosted from the inside, both twins at once. She had wept for 3 days after the twins were born. Not only from pain, she wept because she finally understood that everything she had been told about herself had been wrong. She was not broken. She was not hollow. She had simply been surrounded at the worst possible moment, that by people who needed her to be small so they could feel large. She had stopped being small after that. The carriage slowed. The iron gates of Witmore Hall came into view, heavy and black against the pale morning sky. A footman rushed forward, then stopped when he saw the crest on the carriage door. A long moment passed in which nobody moved. Corette opened the carriage door herself. She stepped down without waiting for assistance, and looked at the footman with the pleasant expression of a woman who had nowhere to be except exactly here. "Lady Corette Dunmore," she said. "My solicitor, Mr. Harwick Bellamy, has sent word ahead. Lord Beaumont is expecting us." The footman opened his mouth, closed it. "My lady, we were not informed of children." "You were not informed of a great many things," she said, and walked through the gates. Behind her, 3 more carriages followed. In the second one, Fletcher said something that made both twins laugh loudly, and her heart did what it always did when she heard them. It lifted and ached at the exact same time. The butler, old Mr. Crewe, waited at the top of the stone steps. He had worked at Whitmore 30 years and had the face of a man no longer impressed by anything. But when he saw the 4 boys climbing out with their matching dark eyes and their unmistakable Beaumont jaw, something moved across his face. Recognition. She filed that away. "His Grace is in the East Study," he said quietly. "He has been there since your solicitor's letter arrived 2 days ago." "Please have the children shown to the yellow rooms," she said. "Mr. Price will see to their needs. IT to the East Study in 20 minutes. She handed Tessa her coat and walked toward the east wing. The house was exactly as she remembered it, and entirely different. New wallpaper in the east corridor, a different painting above the third sconce. Small changes that told her life had continued inside this place, even when she was not there to witness it. She had continued too. She reached the east study door and paused for exactly one breath. Not from nerves. She paused because behind that door was the last version of herself she had ever truly hated. The girl who had believed she was worthless because someone important had suggested it. She paused to say goodbye to that girl one final time. Then she opened the door. Ashton Beaumont stood at the window with his back to her. He was taller than she remembered. His shoulders were broader. His hands were clasped behind his back, the way they always were when he was trying not to show something had disturbed him. He knew she was there. She had not knocked. She did not intend to knock on the house her sons were about to inherit. "You should have sent word yourself," he said. His voice was the same. She had not prepared enough for that. "I did," she said. "I sent a solicitor. That is the appropriate method for legal matters." He turned, and there it was. Not the coldness she had expected. Not aristocratic indifference. His face was open in a way she had seen only a handful of times during their marriage, at the edges of sleep, in the moment before he caught himself being human. He was looking at her like she was a wound he had stopped believing would ever heal, and had just discovered was still bleeding. She did not look away. "What's the children?" he said. "Are they mine?" The question landed like something dropped from a great height. "They are mine," she said. "Every choice I made for them, every year I kept them safe and loved, every morning I got up and built a life worth living, that was mine. Whether you choose to acknowledge the rest is a matter for the courts and your conscience." He stared at her. "Corette," he said. Just her name, nothing attached to it. "The solicitor has outlined everything," she continued. "The Dunmore estate passes to the eldest male heir of my bloodline by the terms of my grandfather's will. Rowan meets every condition. My legal team arrives Thursday. I suggest you have yours ready." She turned to leave. "You are not Barren," he said behind her. Barely a voice at all. She stopped. "No," she said. "I was not." She walked out and closed the door softly. That small, quiet click felt like the first right thing to happen in this house in a very long time. In the corridor, she pressed one hand flat against the cool wall and breathed until her heartbeat returned to something ordinary. Then she straightened, lifted her chin, and went to find her sons. They had already made friends with every member of the kitchen staff and convinced the youngest housemaid to show them the garden. Mr. Price stood in the yellow sitting room, looking mildly frantic. Tessa was drinking tea and not remotely concerned. Colt asked the head gardener if the hedge maze had hidden rooms, Aldwyn reported, adjusting his spectacles. The gardener is currently considering the question very seriously. Corette almost smiled. Let him consider it. She sat, accepted the cup Tessa handed her, and looked out at Witmore's grounds. Somewhere in this house, Ashton Beaumont was not composed. Good. She sipped her tea and let the morning settle around her. She had 7 years of patience stored up and absolutely no intention of wasting it. By evening, Witmore Hall had quietly reorganized itself around 4 young boys, the way large houses sometimes do, instinctively. the way a body adjusts to something new in its bloodstream. The kitchen had produced an entirely unplanned second supper because Fletcher wandered in at 4:30 and mentioned that his favourite thing in the world was potato soup. Cook, a broad, warm woman named Mrs. Osgood, who had no children of her own and a great deal of love she had never found a proper use for, decided immediately that potato soup was what the evening required. She made 2 pots. Rowan had settled in the library with 3 books from the lower shelves, reading with the focused quiet of a boy who had learned early that libraries were the safest rooms in any house. Jasper had found a stray cat near the stables and had not left it since. De Colt had entered the hedge maze with complete confidence, vanished for 2 hours, and reappeared on the lawn with grass in his hair and a satisfied expression, offering no explanation to anyone. Corette watched all of this from the window of her rooms in the west wing and felt the particular mixture of pride and terror that she suspected never fully left a mother, regardless of how grown the children became. She had not seen Ashton since that morning. She had not sought him out. He had not come to find her. That was expected. What she had not expected was the note that arrived at 6 o'clock on a silver tray. Written on Witmore stationery and handwriting she would have known at the bottom of an ocean. It said, "Dinner, 8 o'clock. If you are willing." She turned the card over. Nothing on the back. Tessa looked at the card, so then at Corette, then at the ceiling in the particular way she used when she had a very strong opinion she was choosing not to voice. "I will go," Corette said. Tessa said nothing and went to lay out the appropriate clothes. The formal dining room had been set for 2 at one end of the long table, which struck Corette as both a practical and deeply uncomfortable choice. Ashton was already seated when she arrived, and he stood when she entered, which she hadn't expected, and which cost her exactly 2 steps of composure before she recovered them. He looked tired. Not the tired of a man who had not slept, but the tired of a man who had been thinking too hard about too many things since morning, and had not found rest in any of it. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You asked politely," she said. "That I was raised to respond to politeness." A footman named Thomas, young and visibly nervous, poured wine with the concentration of someone diffusing something fragile. 2 more members of the household staff moved quietly around the edges of the room. Mr. Crewe stood near the sideboard with his hands clasped, watching everything without appearing to watch anything. They were not alone, not truly, and Corette was grateful for it. The first course arrived. They ate for a moment in silence that was not entirely hostile, which was better than she had anticipated. "The eldest boy," Ashton said. "Rowan. He has the Beaumont brow." "He has my grandfather's patience," she replied. "The brow is incidental." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "Fletcher is fearless," she continued, because the silence was beginning to have weight, and she preferred to carry weight herself rather than let it settle in the room. "He made 3 friends in your kitchen this afternoon. He will know every servant's name by morning and remember their birthdays by the end of the week. And the twins? Jasper is kind and careful. Colt will either run this country or cause it considerable trouble. Possibly both." This time Ashton did smile, briefly and against what appeared to be his better judgment, and the sight of it did something uncomfortable to the inside of Corette's chest that she categorically refused to examine. "You raised them well," he said. "I raised them alone," she answered. There is a difference worth acknowledging. The smile disappeared. He deserved that, and he knew it. She watched him know it. "I didn't know," he said, and the words came out carefully, like a man who had been rehearsing them, and was not sure, even now, whether they were the right ones. "You did not ask," she said. "There is also a difference there." He looked down at his glass. "My mother told me you had confirmed it yourself, that you had seen physicians who said children were impossible. She told me you had accepted the annulment without condition." The table between them suddenly felt very wide. Corette set down her fork. "Your mother told you I had confirmed it." "Yes." "And you believed her?" The pause that followed was its own kind of answer. "You believed her," Corette said again, and her voice was very quiet now, quieter than she intended, because underneath the 7 years of careful hardness, something was pressing upward like water beneath ice. Not grief exactly, but something adjacent to it, the old bewildered ache of being handed over by someone who should have fought for her. "You believed your mother over me without asking me a single question. He stopped, started again. "I thought you wanted to leave." "I wanted you to ask me to stay." The words were out before she could stop them. She had not planned to tell them. She had planned to be composed and strategic, and entirely without soft edges for the entirety of this visit. She pressed her lips together and looked at the candle nearest to her, and reminded herself, firmly, of every morning she had gotten up alone and fed 4 boys and made a life out of nothing but her own 2 hands. "Corette," he said, and the way he said it was not the formal way, not the legal matter way, but the way he had said it sometimes in the early days of their marriage, when it was just the 2 of them, and the fire, and nothing yet gone wrong between them. "Do not," she said. He closed his mouth. "We are not here to revisit what was," she said, the composure returning like water finding its level. "We are here because my sons have a legal claim to Dunmore, and I intend to see it honored. Whatever else existed between us has no bearing on that." "It has a bearing on me," he said. She looked at him directly. "Then that is something you will have to manage." She returned to her food. He watched her for a long moment, then did the same. The rest of dinner passed in careful conversation, steered firmly toward neutral ground. The state of the roads from Derbyshire, the weather, Mr. Price's qualifications, the boy's education. Small, more manageable things. Corette answered every question with the precise warmth of a woman who was being pleasant because it served her purposes, and not because she had forgotten anything. But when she stood to leave, and he rose as well, and their eyes met across the candle-lit table with the footman and Mr. Crewe both carefully looking elsewhere, she felt the weight of every unsaid thing in the room pressing against her ribs like a held breath. "Good night, Lord Beaumont," she said. "Good night, Corette," he said. She walked back through the corridors of Witmore Hall, past the new wallpaper and the different paintings, and the long row of portraits that had never included her face, and she climbed the stairs to the west wing where her room was quiet, and Tessa had left a lamp burning. She sat on the edge of the bed. She did not weep. She had used up her weeping years ago on things that deserved it less than this. She simply sat and thought and listened to the house settle around her, this house full of her children and her history, and a man who had just said her name, like it cost him something to say it. Outside, the night was still. Somewhere below, she heard Colt laugh at something, bright and unself-conscious, the laugh of a boy who had never been taught to make himself small. She had made sure of that. She lay down, pulled the covers close, and let herself feel exactly 1 minute of everything she had been holding back since the carriage passed through those iron gates. The longing and the fury and the exhaustion and the grief and the strange, unwelcome, entirely inconvenient flicker of something she was absolutely not going to name tonight. 1 minute. Then she closed her eyes. Tomorrow there was work to do. By the next morning in Witmore Hall, grey light slid through tall windows, horses were being led from stables, and the distant sound of the household waking was heard. But something had shifted overnight. The staff moved differently. Conversations paused when footsteps approached. The arrival of Lady Corette Dunmore and her 4 sons had rearranged the air inside every room. Corette was already at her writing desk before 7, reading a letter from her solicitor, Harwick Bellamy, that made her sit very still for a long moment. The Dunmore estate claim was solid. Her grandfather's will was written in language so precise that 3 legal minds had reviewed it and found nothing to argue with. Rowan, as her eldest son, was the rightful heir by blood and by law, but someone had already filed a counter-petition in London 2 weeks before her arrival. Not Ashton. The name on the petition was Lady Dorinda Beaumont, Ashton's aunt. Corette set the letter down and pressed her fingertips together. She knew Dorinda by reputation. During her marriage to Ashton, Dorinda had visited Witmore twice. Both times she had been gracious in the way certain women are gracious, all surface warmth and quiet calculation underneath. She had looked at Corette the way a chess player looks at a piece on the board, not with hostility, but with the interest of someone already deciding how to remove it. The petition named a distant Dunmore cousin, a Mr. Piers Dunmore of Somerset, as the rightful heir to the estate. According to Harwick's letter, Dorinda had been corresponding with this man since the previous autumn, but before Corette had announced the claim publicly. Someone had told Dorinda about the boys. Corette folded the letter, locked it in her travelling case, and called for tea. Downstairs, the boys had breakfast in the morning room. Rowan ate quickly and returned to the library. Fletcher ate slowly, asking Mrs. Osgood detailed questions about cooking with honey and almonds. Jasper brought the stray cat to the doorway, was told politely by Mr. Price that animals did not come to breakfast, and simply took his own plate outside to sit with the cat on the step. Colt finished, excused himself correctly, and disappeared entirely until a footman arrived at Corette's room with a message from the head groom that one of the young visitors was in the stables attempting to saddle a horse considerably larger than himself with surprising technical accuracy. Or she sent word that he was to be supervised and not stopped. At 9:30, she went downstairs for her scheduled meeting with Ashton. She had phrased the request formally the previous evening, giving him no opening to treat it as anything personal. Business only. She had the letter from Harwick and 3 pages of notes and a list of questions that required answers. She arrived at the east study to find the door already open and voices inside. She stopped in the corridor. "She has no standing beyond the legal claim," said a woman's voice, low and precise. The annulment removed her standing as wife. The claim itself is manageable if Piers files before Thursday. Dorinda. Ashton's voice, flat and careful. She arrived with 4 children. children whose existence is conveniently timed and entirely undocumented in any parish record I have located. Corette went still. They are documented, Ashton said. Harwick Bellamy is reputable. His paperwork will hold. Reputable solicitors can be misled. A pause. Ashton, I have spent 4 months building a clean solution. Piers is legitimate. He will not bring chaos and history and 4 unverified children into Whitmore's affairs. All I need is for you to not interfere with the petition. You filed a counter-petition without telling me. I filed it to protect this family. You filed it, Ashton said, his voice hardening, without telling me, while I was unaware those children existed. You knew, Dorinda, and you knew before I did and said nothing. The silence that followed meant someone had been caught. Corette stepped into the doorway. Dorinda Beaumont was exactly as she remembered. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably composed, with eyes the color of winter water. She was perhaps 60, though she carried herself as though age were a rumor she had declined to believe. When she saw Corette, her expression did not change. That was more alarming than if it had. Lady Dunmore, she said, with warmth so perfectly constructed it could only be false. What an unexpected morning. Lady Beaumont, Corette said, I apologize for interrupting. Not at all. Dorinda turned back to Ashton. We can continue later. No urgency. There is considerable urgency, Ashton said. And we are finished. Something crossed Dorinda's face, quick as shadow, but then it was gone. She collected her gloves, inclined her head to Corette with flawless courtesy, and walked past her into the corridor with the measured steps of a woman already thinking 3 moves ahead. Her footsteps faded. Corette closed the study door. How long has she been here? She asked. She arrived last night after you retired. Ashton moved behind the desk and stood with both hands on the chair back. She filed the petition using a Dunmore cousin I have met once at a funeral. She has been corresponding with him since autumn. Before I announced the claim publicly, Corette said, someone told her about the boys. I know. He looked at her directly. It was not me. She believed him. She was not certain she wanted to, but she did. The boys' parish records are in order, she said, pulling her notes from her pocket and crossing to the chair opposite the desk. All 4 births registered in Bakewell, Derbyshire. Mr. Bellamy holds certified copies. Whatever Dorinda has told her solicitors about documentation is incorrect. She knows that, Ashton said. The documentation argument is a delay tactic. She wants Piers' petition heard first, so the court must address his claim before yours. Corette looked at him. You have been thinking about this since last night. I have been thinking about several things since last night. She did not ask what the others were. There is a clause in the Dunmore-Beaumont marital agreement, she said, returning to the papers in front of her. Signed at the time of our marriage. It states that in the event the marriage produced heirs of joint bloodline, those heirs would supersede any external claim to either estate. Your father's solicitor insisted on it. My grandfather agreed. Ashton went very still. I was not aware of that clause. Very few people were, but Dorinda may be one of them, which is why she needs Piers' petition filed before the heirs are formally presented to the court. She is trying to move faster than the truth. She has a 4-month head start, he said quietly. Then we close the gap. She looked up from the papers. Harwick arrives tomorrow evening. I need access to your estate records today. specifically the original Dunmore-Beaumont agreement. I will have everything brought up this morning. Thank you. She gathered her notes and stood. He said, before she reached the door, Rowan was in the portrait gallery this morning. Mr. Crewe told me. He stood in front of my father's portrait for a long time without saying anything. She paused with her hand near the door. He does that, she said. He looks at things until he understands them. What do you think he understood? She turned to look at him across the room. This man who had broken something in her that had taken years to rebuild, who was watching her now with an expression she had no safe words for. Ask him yourself, she said. He will tell you. She left before the conversation could become something else. In the garden she found Jasper with his cat, now formally named Admiral, and sat beside him on the stone bench while he explained in careful detail why Admiral's left ear, being slightly different from the right, made him special rather than imperfect. She listened to every word. When he finished, he leaned against her arm the way he always did, and she pressed her lips to the top of his head. The roses moved in a small wind. Somewhere inside, Dorinda Beaumont was already planning her next move. Corette let the quiet last a little longer. Harwick Bellamy arrived Wednesday afternoon, travel-worn and sharp, with 2 leather cases he had not let out of his hand since London, and an assistant named Mr. Gibbs, who wrote everything down before anyone finished saying it. The counter-petition was filed Monday, Harwick said, skipping pleasantries as he always did. But the marital agreement clause is valid and witnessed. Once presented, Piers Dunmore's claim collapses before it can be properly heard. Dorinda knows about the clause, Corette told him. He stopped walking. How? I do not know yet, but she was not surprised when I implied it. Her response was too measured. She lowered her voice. She has known for some time, Harwick. Someone in my circle told her. About the clause, about the boys, possibly about my timeline. Harwick turned to Mr. Gibbs, who was already writing. We move the presentation to tomorrow morning, first light. Sir Neville Toft is the magistrate in the village, Corette said. He has jurisdiction for the preliminary hearing. I will need the east study, a large table and good lighting. It is ready for you. Lord Beaumont has agreed to full cooperation. Harwick absorbed that without comment, which from him meant a great deal. The evening became a controlled storm of papers and quiet urgency. Doors opened and closed. Documents moved from table to table. Mr. Gibbs's pen scratched without stopping. Ashton's own solicitor, a measured man named Mr. Doyle, arrived from the village at 6 and worked alongside Harwick with professional efficiency. Ashton sat across from both of them, reviewing everything placed before him, asking precise questions, and signing what needed signing without hesitation. Corette moved between rooms, reading, redirecting, keeping things moving forward. At one point, she passed the library doorway and stopped. Ashton was inside. He was standing near the shelves and did not know she was there. Neither did Rowan, who was seated in the large chair by the window with a book open on his lap. They were not speaking. Rowan was reading, and Ashton was simply standing nearby with his hands at his sides, watching his son with an expression so unguarded that looking at it felt like something she should not be doing. She walked on without making a sound. At 8 o'clock, when the legal work had reached a natural pause, she found Fletcher teaching Thomas the young footman a card game in the corridor outside the kitchen. Mr. Price was standing nearby, pretending not to enjoy it. Colt was asleep on a bench with his boots still on, and his arms crossed in the manner of a soldier at rest. Jasper had apparently convinced someone to allow Admiral into the house because the cat was curled beside Colt's feet with the confidence of an animal that intended to stay. She looked at all of it for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen and asked Mrs. Osgood if there was any soup left. There was always soup left. She sat at the kitchen table alone, which would have horrified half of London society, and ate her soup in the warm quiet of a room that smelled like bread and wood smoke. Mrs. Osgood moved around her without fuss, the way people do when they are comfortable with someone's presence. Outside the kitchen window, the grounds of Witmore were dark and still. She was halfway through the bowl when the door opened and Ashton came in. He looked at her. She looked at him. He looked at the soup. "Mrs. Osgood," he said, with the particular tone of a man who had been Duke of Whitmore for 11 years and was nonetheless slightly afraid of his cook. "Sit down, Your Grace," Mrs. Osgood said, already reaching for another bowl. It was not a suggestion. He sat. Across from Corette, which was the only seat available, because Mrs. Osgood had, with great subtlety, positioned herself and her various tasks in a way that made every other chair inaccessible. The soup arrived. He ate. She ate. A long minute passed. "Doyle thinks we have enough," he said. "We have enough if Dorinda does not file an amendment before morning," she said. "She will not have time. She has had 4 months, and do not underestimate her timeline." He considered this. What does she want, really? Beyond the estate? Corette looked at her bowl. Control. She has always managed this family from the edges. Your father tolerated it. You were less present than she needed you to be, so she filled the space. She paused. If my sons are recognized, her influence over the Corette Dunmore affairs ends entirely. She becomes peripheral. She would destroy your claim to avoid being peripheral. Without hesitation, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "She was the one who told me you had accepted the annulment willingly. I did not question it because she had no reason to lie. I thought." The soup was very warm. The kitchen was very quiet. "She had every reason," Corette said simply. "You were easier to manage without me." He put down his spoon. "Corette, if I had known—" "You did not know, because you did not look." Her voice was not hard. It was simply honest, the way things are when they have been true for so long they no longer need sharpening. You trusted the people around you more than you trusted what you could see with your own eyes. That is not entirely your fault, but it is not nothing either. He absorbed that without defending himself, which she had not expected. "I looked this morning," he said. "In the library, at Rowan." "I know," she said. "I saw you." He looked up. "He has your hands," she said, before she could stop herself. "He holds a book the way you do. Spine up, thumb along the edge. I noticed it when he was 2, and I did not know what to do with the noticing." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was something else, full and careful, and the kind of silence that exists between two people when too much truth has entered the room at once, and neither of them is ready to move. Mrs. Osgood refilled both bowls without being asked. "Dorinda will be at the preliminary hearing tomorrow," Corette said, returning to solid ground. "She will challenge the clause on procedural grounds. She cannot win on the substance, so she will attack the process. Doyle is prepared for that. So is Harwick. But I want to be in that room, Ashton. Not waiting outside. In the room." He met her eyes. "You will be in the room." She nodded once. They finished their soup. Thomas appeared at the kitchen door, looking for something, and found the Duke and the former Duchess eating together at the kitchen table, which clearly rearranged something fundamental in his understanding of the world. He backed out slowly. Mrs. Osgood pretended not to notice. Corette stood to leave. At the door she stopped. "Fletcher told me this evening that he likes it here," she said, not turning around. "He said the house feels like it has good bones. He says that about places. He said it about my aunt's cottage the first time he saw it." She paused. "He is not wrong about places. He is not often wrong about people either." She left the kitchen and climbed the stairs. In her room, Tessa was waiting with a lamp and a look that asked several questions simultaneously. "Not tonight," Corette told her. Tessa asked nothing and went to turn down the bed. Corette stood at the window and looked out at the dark grounds. Somewhere in the east wing, or Dorinda Beaumont was in a guest room with her own lamp and her own thoughts, and 4 months of careful planning that was about to meet the one thing it had not accounted for. Not the clause, not the parish records, not Harwick Bellamy or Mr. Doyle, or the marital agreement signed 20 years ago. The one thing Dorinda had not planned for was Ashton choosing a different direction than the one she had laid out for him. Corette pressed her hand flat against the cold glass. Tomorrow would tell her whether she was right about that. She hoped, in the quiet, private part of herself, that she kept carefully away from strategy and legal proceedings and the long work of protecting her children, that she was right. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. Down the hall she heard Colt wake briefly and ask someone. It was in the confused voice of a child not fully roused whether Admiral was allowed on the bed. A long pause followed. Then Mr. Price's exhausted voice said, "Just this once." Corette closed her eyes and finally slept. Thursday morning broke cold and clear, the kind of morning that feels like a verdict before anything has been decided. Corette was dressed before 6. She stood at the mirror while Tessa pinned her hair and thought about nothing except the order of events. Harwick at 7. Documents reviewed by 8. Sir Neville Toft expected at 9. The preliminary hearing would take place in the East Study, rearranged the previous evening into something that functioned as a proper legal space, without being theatrical about it. Tessa stepped back and looked at her in the mirror with the expression she reserved for moments too large for words. "You look like yourself," Tessa said. "The real one." Corette held her gaze for a moment. "That is the only one I have left." She went downstairs. "Mr. De Gibbs was already in the corridor with papers sorted into 3 stacks. Mr. Doyle arrived from the village at 7:15, looking rested in the way good solicitors always manage, regardless of circumstances. Harwick was at the table when Corette entered, reading through the marital agreement clause for what was clearly not the first time that morning. Ashton came in at 7:30. He was dressed formally. What she had not expected was that he looked entirely clear. Not performing steadiness, but genuinely settled, as though something unresolved in him had found its answer overnight. He looked at her first when he entered, before the solicitors, before the papers, before anything else in the room. She looked back and said nothing. That was enough. Sir Neville Toft arrived at 9 precisely. He was compact and serious with the careful eyes of someone who had spent decades listening to different versions of the same truth and had become expert at locating the actual one. His clerk, a thin young man named Mr. Patch, sat so straight it appeared to cause him discomfort. Dorinda arrived 2 minutes later with her London solicitor, Mr. Ashford Vale, who carried the particular energy of someone expensive and aware of it. She took her seat across from Corette with the composed grace of a woman attending an occasion she believed she had already decided. Her hands were folded. Her expression was pleasantly neutral. She still believes she has this, Corette thought. Harwick presented the marital agreement first. The original document, witnessed and sealed, with the joint bloodline clause written in language that left no interpretive room. Sir Neville read it twice. Mr. Ashford Vale made a note, and his expression did not change, but his shoulders shifted by a small degree that Corette catalogued carefully. Dorinda's eyes moved to Corette for just a moment, still composed, but her folded hands had tightened slightly. Mr. Ashford Vale raised the procedural challenge. The clause, he argued, could not be applied until the heirs had been formally verified as a legitimate issue of the marriage, a process that could not occur at a preliminary hearing. It was technically defensible and designed entirely to buy time. Harwick was ready. He presented all 4 birth certificates from Bakewell, certified and sealed. 2 sworn affidavits from the attending physicians. A sworn statement from Lady Prue Leonard of Derbyshire, Corette's aunt, who had been present at every birth, and whose word, Harwick noted quietly, was beyond legal reproach. Then he presented a letter. Corette had not known about the letter. She watched Harwick place it before Sir Neville, and felt the particular stillness of someone encountering something unexpected inside a situation they believed they had mapped completely. Sir Neville read it. His careful expression became more careful still. "This is a letter from the late Duke of Whitmore," he said, "written 14 months before his death and lodged with his private solicitor, with instructions to produce it in the event of any legal dispute regarding the Dunmore inheritance." He set it down. In it, the late Duke states that the joint bloodline clause was inserted specifically to protect any children born of the Beaumont-Dunmore union, regardless of the marital status of the parents at the time of birth. It was his express wish that no external claim to Dunmore supersede the rights of his son's legitimate issue. Ashton had gone very still. He had not known about the letter either. Corette looked at him across the table. He was looking at Sir Neville with the expression of a man discovering something his father had done for him after it was too late to say thank you. And it was the most human thing she had seen in this house since she returned. Dorinda was looking at the letter with the expression of a woman who had discovered that a door she believed locked from the inside had been locked from the outside all along, by someone she had not accounted for. "Lady Beaumont," Sir Neville said, "the petition filed on behalf of Mr. Piers Dunmore directly contradicts this evidence before this hearing. Do you wish to speak to this before I proceed?" 3 full seconds of silence. "No," Dorinda said, perfectly composed, entirely defeated. Sir Neville proceeded. The preliminary ruling took 12 minutes. At the end of it, Piers Dunmore's petition was set aside. Rowan Dunmore was formally recognized as legitimate heir to the Dunmore estate. Full confirmation would follow from the London court within 30 days. But the substance of the matter, Sir Neville said clearly, was not in question. It was done. Dorinda stood, collected her gloves and looked across at Corette. For one moment the pleasant composure slipped, not into anger, not into grief, but into something colder and more honest than either. The look of a woman who had played a long, careful game and lost it to something she had genuinely not seen coming. "You are more formidable than I gave you credit for," she said. "I had good reason to become so," Corette replied. Dorinda left without another word. The room emptied gradually. Sir Neville spoke with Harwick near the door. Thomas appeared to collect water glasses and retreated with his eyes slightly wider than usual. Corette stood at the window. She heard Ashton cross the room and stop beside her. They stood together, looking out at the grounds, the gardens, the long stretch of Witmore land in the cold morning light. "My father knew," Ashton said quietly. "He prepared for it," she said. "For you. For them. He liked you. He never said it in words. But he liked you." She remembered the old Duke, a man of long silences and occasional unexpected kindness, who had once left a book she had mentioned wanting on her desk, without comment or explanation. "I know," she said softly. "I am sorry," Ashton said. She turned to look at him. "Not for the legal outcome. For 7 years ago. For believing what I was told without asking you. For letting you leave without a single question. For all of it." His voice was steady, but the steadiness cost him something visible. "There is no defense I can make that holds up. I am not trying to make one. I built a good life," she said, "not to make you feel better, just because it is true. I built something real, and those boys are extraordinary, and I did not break." She paused. "But I was broken for a while. And that part matters too. It matters to me," he said, "more than I know how to say." She looked at him for a long moment. This man she had loved at 22 with the whole trusting heart of someone who had not yet learned what it cost to love someone who did not hold it carefully. She had spent 7 years setting that love down, piece by piece, until she believed she had put it somewhere unreachable. She was beginning to suspect she had not put it as far as she thought. "I am not the girl who left this house," she said. "I know," he said. "I am not the man who let her leave." Outside, Colt sprinted across the lawn, being chased by Fletcher, who was laughing loud enough to hear through the glass. Jasper sat near the garden wall with Admiral in his lap. Rowan stood slightly apart, watching his brothers with a small, private smile. 4 boys, her whole life, running across the grass in the cold morning sun. "What happens now?" Ashton asked. "Not about the law, not about the estate." She was quiet for a moment. "Now," she said, "you go and introduce yourself properly to your sons." Something moved across his face, relief and fear, and something bright underneath both. "Start with Rowan," she said. "He is in the library. He will ask you something unexpected, and he will want a real answer. Do not give him a polished one." She paused. "Then find Colt before he does something irreversible in the hedge maze." He smiled fully, the way she remembered from the early days of their marriage, and it did the same thing to the inside of her chest that it had always done, which told her something she was going to have to think about very seriously. He left the room. She watched from the window as he walked out across the lawn. Rowan saw him first and went still, just looking. Ashton stopped a few feet away and said something. Rowan tilted his head, said something back, then stood, and they walked together toward the library, side by side. Same height of shoulder, same careful way of moving. Fletcher ran over without hesitation. Jasper looked up from Admiral with his steady, gentle eyes. Colt came skidding back from the direction of the hedge maze, with leaves in his hair, looked Ashton up and down with complete frankness, and said something that made Ashton laugh out loud. Corette pressed her hand flat against the warm glass and stayed there a long time. 3 weeks later. The formal confirmation from London arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who had clearly ridden hard and was given soup by Mrs. Osgood before he was allowed to leave. Rowan's inheritance of Dunmore was confirmed without condition. Harwick's accompanying note said simply, "As agreed." Corette read it at the kitchen table with her morning tea and felt the long tension of several years release from her shoulders like something physically departing. She sat with it quietly for a while. Rowan received the news with the gravity of a boy who had always sensed something important was being carried by the people around him. He nodded slowly and asked whether they could visit Dunmore before summer. She said yes, absolutely yes. He returned to his book, then looked up after a moment and said, "Mamma, thank you for not stopping." She had to look at the ceiling before she could answer him. Fletcher immediately began planning what kind of horse he would keep at Dunmore. Jasper asked whether the Admiral could come. Colt announced that Dunmore would need a hedge maze, and said it with such certainty that nobody argued. The days settled into a rhythm Corette had not planned for. Ashton spent an hour each morning in the library with Rowan. It had begun as a single conversation about the portrait gallery and become, without either of them announcing it, a daily arrangement. She did not know exactly what they talked about. She did not ask. Whatever it was, Rowan came to breakfast afterward with the look of a boy whose questions were finding answers, and Fletcher had appointed himself Ashton's guide to everything he considered important about the estate, which included the stables, the kitchen garden, the fastest route between the east and west wings, and every loose flagstone in the courtyard that was suitable for skipping. Ashton accepted all of it, with a patience that Corette watched from a careful distance, and found, against her own intentions, genuinely moving. Jasper introduced him to Admiral one afternoon, with the seriousness of an introduction between equals. Ashton treated it exactly that way. Colt remained the most direct. He asked questions without preamble, changed subjects without warning, and once told Ashton across the dinner table that he had done something quite wrong and should not repeat it, referring to something unspecified but clearly understood between them. So Ashton said quietly that he agreed. Colt nodded, returned to his food, and that was apparently sufficient. She and Ashton existed in a careful space between what had been and what was not yet decided. They had dinner together most evenings, sometimes with the boys, sometimes after the boys were in bed. He did not push. She did not retreat. They talked about the children and the estate, and occasionally, carefully, about the years between. He told her one evening that he had dismissed the household member who had been reporting to Dorinda. A young undersecretary named Mr. Brent, recruited 2 years prior, who had sent word to Dorinda the moment the Dunmore claim surfaced in London legal circles. "Dorinda will not be returning to Whitmore," Ashton said. "She retains her own estate and her allowance, but she has no further standing in the affairs of this house." Corette thought of Dorinda's face at the hearing, that cold, honest look of a woman who had lost on ground she believed was hers. She loved this family in her own way, Corette said. She simply loved controlling it more. "Yes," he said. Nothing more was needed. Piers Dunmore of Somerset sent a brief letter withdrawing from all proceedings. It contained no apology, which was honest at least. Harwick acknowledged receipt. And that was the end of it. On a Friday afternoon in the third week, Corette was in the garden with her correspondence when footsteps approached on the path. She looked up to find Ashton standing a few feet away with his hands in his coat pockets and the look of a man who had been preparing to say something for several days and had decided today was the day. While she set down her pen, he sat on the bench beside her. Not close, but close enough that she was aware of the specific weight of the space between them. "I keep arriving at the same problem," he said, "which is that I do not have the right to ask what I am about to ask, and I am going to ask it anyway." She waited. "Stay," he said. "Not for the legal proceedings, not for the estate. Stay because this house has been the right house again since you came back to it. Because your sons are extraordinary and growing more so every day. Because I have spent 7 years in rooms that felt too large, and I now understand why." He paused. "And because I have never stopped. Not once. Not even when I was most certain I should." The garden was very quiet. A bird moved in the roses along the eastern wall. Corette looked at her hands for a moment, at the ink on her fingers, at the plain evidence of a life she had built with nothing but herself. "I did not come back here for you," she said. "I know," he said. "I came back for my sons, for what they are owed, for the life they deserve. I know that too. And I am not the girl who needed saving," she said, her voice clear and entirely her own. "I saved myself. I want that to be understood completely." "It is understood," he said. "I am not asking you to need saving. I am asking whether two people who have both become who they needed to become might find something worth building in the space between where they were and where they are now." She looked at him steadily. "Fletcher likes it here," she said. "He has named 6 horses. None of them are his yet. Jasper has decided Admiral is a permanent resident. I have spoken to the head groom. Colt will redesign this entire estate before he is 12. I am counting on it. And Rowan," she said, and her voice softened the way it only did for him, her first, her steady one. "Rowan needs to know who he is, all of who he is, not only the Dunmore side. I want to show him," Ashton said. "I want to show all of them. Every day I am given with them, I want it to count." She was quiet for a long moment. The roses moved in the wind. Red and relentless, the same ones she had refused to look at when she first came through the gates. "I am not forgiving everything at once," she said. "That is not how I am built. It will be slow and it will be honest, and there will be days when I am still angry, and I will need you to understand that without making me explain it from the beginning every time." "Yes," he said simply. "And I am the same woman who walked through those gates and would walk through them exactly the same way again. That does not change. I would not want it to," he said. "That woman is the reason any of this is possible." She looked at him for a long time. The afternoon light was thin and golden, and it fell across the garden, the way light does in the last, good hour before evening, making everything look simultaneously ordinary and precious. "Then we begin slowly," she said, "and we are honest, and we do not pretend the years between didn't happen." "Agreed," he said. "And the boys come first, in every decision. Always. Always," he said without hesitation. She nodded once, It was not a declaration. It was not a fairy tale ending, tied neatly with everything forgiven and nothing remembered. It was something quieter and more durable than that. It was two people choosing to face forward together after a long time of facing apart, and doing it with their eyes open. She picked up a pen. He did not leave. He sat beside her in the afternoon quiet while she returned to her correspondence, and the garden settled around them both, unhurried and warm. After a while, Colt came running across the lawn toward them at full speed with something cupped in both hands that he was very excited about and would not stop moving long enough to properly display. Fletcher appeared behind him, calling out instructions. Jasper followed at a calm pace, with Admiral trotting beside him. Rowan came last, walking with his hands in his pockets and his face turned up toward the pale sky, thinking of something private that he would share when he was ready. They descended on the bench in a wave of noise and questions and elbows, and the garden, which had been so quiet a moment before, became entirely full. Corette caught Ashton's eye over the top of Colt's head. He looked at her with an expression she recognized from long ago and had never quite stopped knowing. The expression of a man who understood, in this exact moment, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. She looked away before he could see what was on her face. But she was smiling. The roses climbed the eastern wall in the last of the afternoon light, red and patient, and entirely unbothered by everything that had taken place beneath them. They had been growing here long before any of this began. They would go on growing long after. Some things, it turned out, did not stop simply because they were not tended. Some things grew anyway, quietly, stubbornly, through every hard season, waiting for the moment when someone finally looked up and noticed they were still there. Corette looked at them now. She let herself,